শর্মিষ্ঠাদি, শর্মিষ্ঠাদি, শর্মিষ্ঠাদি,
বলো 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 বলো।
অডিও মিউট করার ব্যাপারটা ডেফিনেটলি বলবে, ওকে?
হ্যাঁ, একদম আমার লেখা পুরো নোট করা আছে সব, তোমার চিন্তা নেই।
প্রচুর আওয়াজ আসছে এবং আমি তো বাসের আওয়াজ পাচ্ছি।
And with the warning, if audio is not mute or like say someone is creating problem by I will be forced to remove him or her.
Okay, that's done. Okay. No, I'll be definitely saying, don't worry.
And Rohan, ওটা কন্টিনিউয়াসলি রোহন, হাসিনা, সফিউল, এভরিবডি চ্যাট বক্সে লিখতে থাকবে এটা, হ্যাঁ, যে ইউ হ্যাভ টু কিপ ইউর audio muted, এটা করতেই হবে, otherwise there will be trouble, people will forget.
It's like generally most people follow it by now, they have learned this, but only 1-2 people will be there who might create one or two.
Another thing is when somebody joins at a particular point of time and he or she had no idea of the instruction that has been given. So,
and your speaker has PPT or something?
No, I don't think so.
Then no problem. The problem तब होती है कि if speaker is presenting something and someone start presentation, तो वो बीच में disrupt थोड़ा.
No, there won't be a PPT, right? Because she is conversing, no? It's an interview mode, so there won't be PPT.
Then no problem. We should not worry much. Someone from administration joining?
Don't think so. But any idea who is joining? Anybody? VC sir?
No idea. I had mailed the Vice Chancellor and there has been no response, so that's that.
একটু ফোন করনি
স্যার? আবার ফোন এমনি হয় না, কি বলবো, it's an academic exercise. আর এসব অ্যাডমিনিস্ট্রেশন কি হবে? যদি টাকা নিয়ে থাকতাম ইউনিভার্সিটি থেকে তাহলে ডেফিনেটলি বলতাম।
আসসালামু আলাইকুম আমজাদ স্যার।
ওয়ালাইকুম আসসালাম।
আমি দেশ থেকে আবিদ।
আর কেউ? হ্যাঁ বুঝতে পারছি, আর কেউ আসছে?
আসা তো উচিত, আজকে তো এমন ডিপ লেভেল টক রেখেছেন, আজকে আসা উচিত।
আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে, আসুন।
সবাই নিজেদের ভিডিওগুলো অফ করে দিলে স্পিকার বললে যে বলবেন তিনি শুধু অন রাখলেই হলো।
রোহন, বলছি ডক্টর ফ্রান্সেসকাকে রিমাইন্ডার দিতে হবে নাকি?
রিমাইন্ডারটা কিভাবে দেবো?
সেটাও তো কথা। হাউ টু
না, বলে দিন যে আমাদের শুরুতে একটু, সেটা কি বলা আছে যে শুরুতে মিনিট 5-10 দেরি হবে, মানে আমাদের এই ফর্মালিটিস গুলো?
না, উনি আসুন, তারপর এখনো বলা হয়নি কিছু আর কি।
আচ্ছা।
সিদ্ধার্থর মাইক্রোফোন আউট অফ অর্ডার, ওই জন্য তোমাদের উত্তর দিতে পারছে না, আমাকে জানালো। very warm welcome to the 3-day international webinar, Planetary Crisis and the Humanities, Prospects in Theory and Praxis, organized by the Department of English, Alia University. The webinar addresses a very glaringly visible and pertinent issue, that of the factors which endanger the world and the planet, so to speak. The advent of the pandemic COVID-19 has once more jolted us out of the stupor of inactivity, self-centeredness, and nonchalance about the various crises which threaten the world, the environmental, social, political, economic. While the humanity had been addressing them sporadically, definitely, intermittently, in person and in clusters, never had a situation come like this, when there is an urgent need to examine, rethink, and most importantly, act on them in terms of praxis. At the Department of English, therefore, Alia University, we thus thought of bringing together experts who could look into these dangers threatening the life of the planet from various perspectives. The talk, we hoped, would illuminate the issues better and remove the cobwebs of doubt and non-understanding. Along that, we sincerely hope it would direct us to the possible solutions to cure these maladies, paving a way for better and brighter future. It is an honor to take this opportunity and mention our esteemed resource persons who would be speaking at this webinar. First and foremost, Dr. Francesca Ferrando, today, New York University at 7 p.m. Followed tomorrow, that is 29th August, by Professor Shamantok Dash from Jadavpur University at 11 a.m. Dr. Shumana Roy, 29th August at 7 p.m. Followed by Professor Scott Slowick, University of Idaho on 13th August, 9:30 a.m. These are all in IST, Indian Standard Time. And the final speaker would be Dr. Ayelet bin Ishai, University of Haifa, who would be speaking at 12 noon on 30th August also. While I welcome you all to join, be enriched and encourage us in our efforts, may I request the audience to kindly, and this is a fervent request, keep their microphones muted. Please keep your videos off and do not share the screen. Kindly put all your questions and comments in the chat box. These questions and comments will be taken up by the moderator at the end of each session, and chosen questions will be addressed by the resource person. These general rules would be applicable for all the sessions on all the 3 days. With these few words, may I now request our head of the department, Dr. Tajuddin Ahmed, to kindly deliver the welcome address. Over to Tajuddin.
Thank you, Shurmishta. Am I audible, Shurmishta?
Yes, you are. You're audible very much.
Okay. Thank you, Shurmishta. Everybody, I welcome you all to this webinar on planetary crisis and the humanities, prospects in theory and praxis, organized by the Department of English, Alia University, Kolkata. Most of you might have known that our flyer begins with a poem entitled Shucheta. This is by Janananda Dash. The following lines have been quoted over there. First, let me read them in Bangla. পৃথিবীর গভীর তর অসুখ এখন কেবলই জাহাজ এসে আমাদের বন্দরের রোদে দেখেছি ফসল নিয়ে উপনীত হয় সেই শস্য অগণন মানুষের সব. In my rough paraphrasing, it reads something like this. Our planet is in deep crisis now. Come to our strange ports carrying crops. Those crops are corpses of innumerable human beings. It is not that the earth has faced a crisis like this for the first time. It has happened many a times before in history of human civilization. We can go back to the ancient Thebes Oedipus Rex is sitting on his throne, worried and concerned. People are dying. The priest is explaining the crisis. The situation is very grim out there. A blight is on our harvest in the year, a blight upon the grazing flocks and herds, a blight on wives in travel. Armed with blazing torch, the god take hath swooped upon our city, emptying the house of Cadmus. We can go to the 14th century Europe. Most of us might have seen the film Seventh Seal by Ingmar Bergman. The night, Antonius Block is just back from crusade. And Europe has gone through a tremendous ravage. First it was crusade, now it is plague. It is deep in crisis, political, physical, moral, and many more. The night is playing chess with death, while Yoff, Mia, and Mikhail, the three innocent beings, they are trying to save themselves from the storm of death. The night tried to make sense of the crisis. So did Oedipus. So did Jivanananda Das. We almost always try to make sense of something that is almost meaningless. Let me go to Indian history for a very brief episode. How much of this is story and how much of this is true, we'll never try to know. Myth, story, history, the boundary is almost always blurred. King Ashoka had a son. His name was Kunal. Kunal had got wonderful eyes, as beautiful as those of the Himalayan birds Kunal. But there was a treachery on part of the stepmother. Kunal was blinded. Years later, he came back to Patliputra. No one allowed him to the palace because he was shabbily dressed and poor. He was with his wife Kanchanmala. Next morning, as he was singing outside the palace, the king heard him, recognized the voice of his own son, called him to the palace. And the treachery was discovered. The woman is to be now punished. But Kunal intervened. And Kunal requested for the forgiveness of that woman who has done the act of betrayal. And lo, behold, there is miracle. Kunal gets back his eyes. In this 21st century crisis of ours, will we be rewarded with a miracle? Will we see a miracle? In the 14th century Europe, in the region of Alsace, in France, there was a painter. He was known as master of playing cards. He used to draw pictures of trees, animals, and flowers. He used to draw pictures of plants, animals, and other beings at the back of playing cards. But then suddenly he did something very extraordinary. At the back of one particular playing card, he actually drew the picture of a saint, a 3rd century saint, Saint Sebastian. Saint Sebastian later became the guardian angel against the fight, against the plague. What sort of picture that is? Saint Sebastian is being attacked by the soldiers of death. Arrows are flying at him. He is facing his death, but there is a smile on his face. Is there a little bit of sarcasm? Perhaps. If not sarcasm, at least pride. Some sort of pride at the face of death, decay, devastation, and crisis. Does that smile help us in understanding the crisis, the difficulty, the death that surrounds us? Many questions are there like this. But one thing is for sure, in this 21st century, our planet is indeed in deep crisis. COVID-19 is just one manifestation of the many facets of that crisis. If I say that in this webinar, we will be able to make sense of the meaningless, make sense of the great fear, the great death and devastation that causing around us, that would be too tall a claim, I know. But nonetheless, our effort will be to understand something out of this crisis, because in the understanding perhaps lies a hint of a remedy, a hint of some sort of healing. In this webinar, we will listen to some of the important and some of the very erudite persons who will focus on the crisis and concomitant issues. Today we have among us Dr. Francesca Ferrando. She is from New York University. And we will have in our other sessions, Professor Shamantok Das from Jadavpur University, Dr. Shumona Rai from Ashoka University, Professor Scott Slovich from University of Idaho, and finally we will have Ayelet Ben Ishai from Haifa University, Israel. Ideas will be exchanged. We'll be hearing new things, new wisdom. I welcome all our speakers in this meeting. I also heartily welcome all the students, scholars, participants who are present here and will be present on the other sessions as well. To conclude my brief words, let me come back to the poem of Jivanananda once again, with which I have started. In that very poem, Suchetana, there was another line which I want to go back. Suchetana, ei pothe alo jele, ei pothei prithibir kromomukti hobe. In my rough translation, it reads something like this. Suchetana, by this road, lighting a lamp, our planet will reach her freedom. With that hope, let us all participate in this webinar. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And once again, I welcome you all in this webinar. Thank you. Shormishadi, I am done.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Tajuddin Ahmed, for that very, very evocative welcome address. I now request Professor Amjad Hussain, the senior most faculty of our department, to say a few words about the university. Sir, please, could you?
Distinguished scholar, Dr. Francesca Ferrando, other esteemed guests, and dear participants, good evening. I'll say just a few words about our university. Alia University started its journey only in 2008. However, its genesis as a university is linked to a very old institution established in 1780 at the behest of Warren Hastings, the British Governor General of India. Warren Hastings, in one of his minutes, mentioned it as Calcutta Mohammedan College. Now, Mohammedan College was perhaps a translation of the Arabic word madrasa. So later, it gradually came to be referred to as Calcutta Madrasa in government records and was popularly called Alia Madrasa, Alia meaning noble or elevated. It was established to teach Islamic jurisprudence.
Sir, you are not being heard,
Not
sir.
Hello? Hello?
Hello, yes, sir, we can now hear you. We can now hear you, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. even Western medical science was taught here till the establishment of Calcutta Medical College in 1835. Now, Alia University offers courses in all the major
So we again can't hear you, sir.
branches studies, social. Yes, can I listen? Can I or am I audible
We
now?
can hear, yes, we can hear you, sir. Slightly strained, sir. Slightly
Yes.
strained.
Okay. Thus, as in the past, this university has continued to maintain its heritage of blending tradition and modernity, promoting continuity and change. This webinar is also imbued with that spirit of engaging with new knowledges and welcoming the emerging areas of studies. I think webinar as a popular event is ironically a happy outcome of the terrible COVID-19 pandemic. The lockdown has confined people within their rooms and made them work from home, but they can see the clear sky and the far-off blue Himalayas standing on the rooftops of the most polluted city. And it has made us truly realize that we have entered into the post-human multiverse that is relational, hybrid, and mediated by technology. Thank you very much. Now over to Dr. Shormishta Chatterjee and Mr. Rohan Hassan, who will be in conversation with Dr. Francesca Ferrando, the most powerful voice in the field of philosophical posthumanism. Thank you once again.
Thank you, sir, for telling us something about our university and those very inspirational words. With this, we now directly move on to our very esteemed speaker. And I take immense pleasure, and it's my honor to introduce to you Dr. Francesca Ferrando, who is the first esteemed resource speaker of this webinar. May I also request Professor Rohan Hassan to join us for this session. Professor Hassan and myself will be in conversation with Dr. Ferrando alternately. But before I request Dr. Ferrando to start off, may I introduce her to you. Professor Dr. Ferrando teaches philosophy at the New York Liberal Studies and New York University, a leading voice in the field of post-human studies and founder of the Global Post-Human Network. She has been the recipient of numerous honors recognitions, including the Sainati Prize with the acknowledgement of the President of Italy. She has published extensively on these topics. Her latest book is Philosophical Posthumanism by Bloomsbury 2019. In the history of TED Talks, she was the first speaker to give a talk on the topic of posthuman. The US magazine Origins named her among the 100 people making change in the world. She is indeed a widely recognized public intellectual. With this, I welcome Dr. Ferrando to this session. Dr. Ferrando, are you here? Can you hear me? Doctor?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. So nice to see you and hear you, ma'am. Ma'am, we then begin the session, and may I request Professor Rohan to kindly take up from here.
Thank you, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Good morning to Professor Ferrando and good evening to all. Thank you so much, Professor Ferrando, for agreeing to this proposal on such a short notice, and thank you for encouraging throughout. I would not take much time anymore. I'd like to straight jump into the session, and I begin with the question that say in the face of this planetary crisis that we're facing right now, which is then again a direct or indirect byproduct of human action. How imperative or urgent has it become for us to kind of reconsider us to be humans once more? and act accordingly?
Well, first of all, thanks so much, Rohan, for your wonderful question. I would also, before starting our dialogue, which is going to be incredible, thank Alia University for organizing this webinar. It's going to be really interesting to see in 3 days all the ideas, insights, perspectives about our current situation. I would also like to thank so much Sharmishta Chatterjee, Hamed Hossein, Tajuddin Hamed for their wonderful presentation and introductions. And again, I wanted to thank you for thinking of this moment of crisis in not only in an intellectual way, but also in a practical one. What does it mean? What does it mean to our existence? What is going to come out of this? So in that sense, I think that the posthuman is really going to help us navigate this moment. And of course, this relates very much to your question about what does it mean to be human in a moment of planetary crisis? So I think that the first insight that posthumanists give us, and is very, very precious, especially in this moment, is realizing the interconnection of existence. For instance, this specific crisis is a result of human action. The idea that we were separated from nature, that we were masters of nature, that we were going to be mastering nature, these were all part of different kind of narratives and are still part of many social and political narratives. And this has to change. The crisis, it's of course a tragic moment because there is death, because there is misery and sadness and disease, but it's also a moment of introspection. It's also a moment of deep insight, and it's also a moment of decision, of choice. This is actually the meaning of the word come from krino, Greek, which means to judge, to choose, to decide. So a crisis is a breakthrough. On some level, can also be an epiphany. So, of course, a crisis is hard to navigate, especially if we get to the crisis when we are already unstable as a society, with all the issues that we had prior to the crisis. They are going to boom during the crisis. As individuals, if we were already unbalanced, the crisis is going to boom, push us to the limit. But it's also the moment where we have to stop, because there is nowhere to go. Nowhere to go as a species, where to stop, where to be. We cannot move, no longer fly from here to there, no longer, being lost in hundreds of projects and committee and all these things. We have to face ourselves. So this moment is a mirror of ourselves. And this, on some level, also a gift to be able to stop. Because I think in the 21st century, many human societies were pushed to a kind of schizophrenic approach in which nothing would be ever enough. That's why there is also this big narrative about becoming immortal, in the sense that time is not enough in this kind of linear sense where you just need more and more and more money and more possessions and more of anything. Of course, in this kind of linear approach based on quantity, time is not enough because numbers are infinite. So you can have, hundreds of things and money in possession is never enough because you can just add zeros. So the crisis stopped and there is a pause, and it allows us to see where we were at. Now, that is, for me, is a great gift that we have to take not only as individuals in our spaces, as much space or as little space as we have. We need to face where we were at in our existence, where we were doing really what we need to be doing, what we want to be doing, what we are here to be doing, but also as a species. What are we doing as a species? Where we are at? So I think in this sense, posthumanism really brings us some deep insights. The first one is that we are not just living on this planet. We are part of this planet. There is a metaphor that Alan Watts, who was Taoist, let's say, philosopher from England. He later on moved to the States, and he was very much influenced by Indian philosophy and Chinese philosophy and Islamic philosophy. He really studied it all. And I like his metaphor of thinking of humans as apples. We think of us, taking the apples from a tree. But he said, but we are fruit of the planet. We are the real direct result of the planet. We are nature of the planet. So in that sense, it's very important to realize that we are not just living on planet Earth, we are part of planet Earth. And we need to think us in deep intra-relational ways with other species, with the bios, with the the oikos, which means home, but is also who we are, and the planet. And of course, also with technology, which of course with COVID is becoming much more impeding as an issue. It's not anymore just about transhumanism. It's about our daily life. Because in fact, we are now, with this wonderful meeting of more than 200 people, connected from all over the world, people from India and Greece and Pakistan and Italy and the US and Namibia. We are all here because of technology. And of course, also many other issues related to tracking with COVID. So technology is becoming an issue of the everyday life. It's not so much anymore something that some crazy transhumanists are talking about. So in that sense, posthumanism really is becoming not just something that is done in academia, but is a way to understand, access what's happening. And in that sense, I think it relates to the core of all kinds of traditions coming from all planet Earth, from any area in which philosophy, it's really the love of wisdom. It's not just something that we write about. It's not just something we have a degree on. It's something that can enhance our life. Otherwise, what is? That's why I like your title, The Prospect in Theory and Praxis. It's not just a theory. Because if it was just a theory, with COVID-19 and the crisis that it's emerging, posthumanism would be not of use at all. Because COVID-19 is not asking us to think through theory. It's asking us to be fully present in the moment. So in that sense, I think that, again, posthumanism, it's really emerging as a way to understand what's going on, but also as a way to enhance our life, not just through some technological speculative developments, which may come or may not, but through our existential presence and understanding who we are. And all the traditions, every tradition says, know who you are. That's the best gift you can do to yourself, to the planet, to the species, or to any other entity that you may want to bring to the conversation. So in that sense, thank you so much again, Juan, for your question. I think that the posthumanism, especially connected to your beautiful title, is really showing that we are not just talking about a new theory of trendy academia, which is also, and it's fine, but it's really a tool that helps us navigating everyday existence, especially with a crisis. Is a moment of decision, of choice, and ourself as a species. So there are all these layers connected.
Thank you so much, Professor Ferrando, for the response. I would like to go to the fundamentals of it. What do you mean by post-human? I mean, what of which human is the post-human a post, actually, if you just elucidate?
Thank you so much, Juan. That's a great question. And of course, if we want to be really comprehensive of the whole big picture of history, which does not start with recorded writing, humans have been around for much longer. So you can think that humans on some level have always been posthuman, because in one sense, the human is a historical construction. And I'm going to be a little more clear about this, because it might sound very theoretical, but it's not. And it is important to understand. So there are some different ways to approach philosophy. In this sense, again, I do see posthumanism as a way to understand better who we are. In this sense, we grow up learning that we are humans. And many people take this for granted. Ask many friends, family members, from all different nations, you ask them, are you human? And most people are going to say yes. And then you ask them, what does it mean to be human? And most people take for granted that they know what it means to be human. But then when you look at the history of the human, you find out a lot of interesting things. First of all, you realize that in the history of the human itself becomes more than a notion, a process. I call it a humanization, or even better as a term, a humanizing. Because you look at the history of humanity, again in a global sense, and you're going to see that the human is in a hierarchical way. So that some societies or some groups of people were defining who was the human in separation from other humans. To be more precise, if we really want to go to an etymological approach, which we don't have to, because the term human you can find in so many different languages. But for instance, if we go through English, this would come from Latin humanus, which was connected from a notion perspective to the idea of the Greek anthropos. And that's why we think of anthropocentrism, anthropology. So anthropos in Greek means human. But also when we look at the notion of the human in Greek, in ancient Greek, you realize that anthropos did not include all humans. Humans had to be pretty much Greek, speaking Greek, anthropos. Otherwise, they were considered barbarian. This notion of barbarians keep coming back in the history of humanity. I am based in the US at the moment, or in the Americas, if you look at the big landscape. And for instance, when this area of the world was, between little commas, discovered by the Europeans, I say between little commas because obviously if you were not Native American, you were from here, so it's not that you were discovering anything. But the European coming here in the 15th, 16th century, they had all these discussions, specifically speaking, for instance, of Spain, where a lot of the initial discussion was started, and there were all this discussion about Native Americans. To the level that some people were saying they are not human, they are subhumans, they are less than humans. Because of course you have to think of slavery, colonization, economic interests. While other people were saying, no, they are fully human and we should treat them as such. But I'm just bringing these two examples out of many. You can think of genocides or racism or sexism, ethnocentric, etc., 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 to realize that the notion of the human has been used as a tool to bring some groups on top of others in a hierarchical way. So even if, genetically speaking, we're all humans, in the history of humanity, in the history of humanizing, not every human has been considered as such. And also not every human has been considered as human as others. So this is, of course, is a political, social political aspect of posthumanism, which is not about revenge in any way, but it's about recognition and acknowledgement. Because if we are all in this together, we can only understand through the voices of everyone. If I am you and you are me, if we are in a species connected, I cannot only be the only one speaking. That's why I like the dialogue, for instance. After COVID-19, I don't feel so much giving lectures anymore because I want to hear your voices, because we are many and we need to listen to others. So in that sense, the point is that we need to understand that the plural is not separated from the one. We are all connected, but we are all different, and we need to understand this in order to understand who we are as individuals, as a species, and existential beings.
Thank you. Shormista ma'am, over to you.
Dr. Francesca, you've noted in your wonderfully insightful work, Philosophical Posthumanism, that philosophical posthumanism is genealogically related to radical deconstruction of the human and can be defined as a post-human, a post-anthropocentrism, and a post-dualism. Would you please elaborate on this, ma'am?
Thank you so much, Sharmishta, for your important question. So you're right. At one point, I realized that posthumanism was a notion that was very confusing for people. I would get all these interviews and people interested in the topic, and a lot of people would be very confused, thinking that posthumanism, for instance, means transhumanism, which is not the case. We're going to talk about it later on. But transhumanism, for instance, is very clear what is the goal of transhumanism. And again, we're going to talk about transhumanism later on, but transhumanism is really focusing on human enhancement. On the other side, philosophical, let's not even say philosophical, posthumanism in general, it is coming from a very different angle, post-colonialism, the deconstruction of the human, postmodernism, and it may get, of course, very deep, but also very confusing. This is why I realized that we needed to have a type of general understanding of what posthumanism is in order to even talk about it, in order to do something about this. So about thinking a while, I realized that a way to describe it, and it's not hierarchical in any ways. I'm going to be using 3 layers. But these three layers are not hierarchical. So it's not that one comes before the other, but they're all interconnected. So what I saw as a general way to describe this, which may change, again, everything is always evolving and changing, so it may change in the future, but a way, I think it's a good way, a comprehensive way to describe it is through these three layers. The first one is posthumanism as a post/humanism. In this sense, the answer that I gave to the important question that Ron brought before is the way to describe posthumanism as a post/humanism, which means that the human is many. The human is a plural notion. In order to be fully human, or if you want to go post-human, you really need to understand that we are many. And this is something that we have to acknowledge with joy. It's not something that should scare us. It's not about making everyone looking exactly like us, because evolution does not work towards unification, but towards diversification. If you want to go through biology, or if you want to go through any kind of religious insights, God as a divine energy created a multiplicity of ideas and things and species. This is the power of creativity and generation. But of course, all of this is related. So this is, we cannot forget. So it's not that all these species and plurality is something that come at war with each other. We are many. Actually, ourselves as a being, ourselves as a person, we come with different biotas and different microbes that live inside of us and bring us health and make us healthy. Think of the gut biota, for instance, the biota in your guts, that allow us to be healthy. So in that sense, the many and the one are not separated. Going back to what we said. So going back to our three layers. Okay, first one, post/humanism, the realization we should come again with joys, not out of revenge or out of victimization or nothing like that, of joy and recognition of the plurality of humanity. So we are many, humans, plural notion, not hierarchical. Second one is post/anthropocentrism. So the idea that in this deconstruction of the notion of the human, so the deconstruction of something that we think we know, we are going to unfold many different layers that actually allow us to understand us in much deeper ways than this general frame that we thought we knew what it meant. So in that sense, post-anthropocentrism means taking the brave move, but also the joyful recognition that the human is not the best species, the most intelligent ones, the highest in the realm of existence, that we are one of species of many others, and that we are in this together with many other species, that we should recognize their beauty and their divinity and their importance, not in a sense that they are there for us, or that we are here for them. That everyone, all these species, all this existence has their own existential dignity. We need to recognize everyone around us, humans and non-humans. Of course, this is, it's difficult. If you go into practical perspective, what do you do if a mosquito in an area with malaria is trying to bite you? Are you going to smash it? Are you not? I mean, I'm not saying that it's easy, but I say at least as a big narrative, we need to shift this idea that we are the best, the more, all the documentary you look at about the human, any kind of documentary, from any kind of tradition that you find, they're always talking about human as the best, species, the most intelligent, the more evolved. Enough of that narrative. That's a wrong narrative. It's bringing us to the wrong path. And this is also bringing us to the crisis that we are facing, to the Anthropocene, to the 6 mass extinction. We don't need that kind of narrative. And I'm very passionate about this, because the first layer was already addressed, and it still needs to be addressed deeply. I think of all the movements that are doing this, Black Lives Matters and Me Too movement. I mean, there are a lot of movements that are talking about, all the voices that have been silenced in the history of humankind. But at least it's acknowledged. Anthropocentrism, for the most cases, is not even acknowledged. It's taken as granted. It's okay to, killing other animals and burn the forest. It's not even an issue. So that's why I'm very passionate about this as well, because it's not a layer that comes after the first one. We're not talking about the order here. We need to address all of these layers in conjunction. So the second one is letting go with joy the primacy of the human. We don't need this primacy. We don't. It's fine to be as important as others, and in this together. So that's very important. And the third one is the layer of post-dualism, which has been not explored enough in the realm of academia. It has been explored in other traditions, mystic tradition, Sufi tradition. I mean, there are a lot of traditions, especially mystic traditions, that talk about non-dualism specifically. And I use the term post-dualism because I acknowledge the fact that many societies in the 21st century come with a very dualistic mindset that is taught to very young children for day one of their existence. So knowing this, I think that it's important to realize that we cannot just be non-dual, although of course eventually consciousness is non-dual, but the point that we need to deconstruct all these layers of dualism that has been taught us from a very, very young age. So in that sense, I see these three layers, post-humanism, post-anthropocentrism, and post-dualism, as really the key to bring out post-human visions, experiences, praxis. And again, they are not to be thought in an orderly way. So it's not that you first accomplish the first one and then the second and third one. No, no, no. You have to think of these three in an integrated way, in an organic way, to really try to bring about different visions. Be brave, because this is what we are here for. If people believe in God, this is what God wants you to do. And if you do not believe in God, this is why you are manifesting. It's not easy to come to this planet and exist. But if we are here, we need to be brave enough to see what we're seeing, to be honest with what we're seeing, and to be able to say it doesn't have to be this way. It can be changed right now. But why a lot of changes do not happen is because people get caught in habits that do not come from anyone but from us. And as a species, sometimes we adopt habits that were not here long ago, and all of a sudden become part of a species. The habit of war, for instance, if you look at the Paleolithic archaeology, there is no trace of war in many areas of the world. And all of a sudden now we think that, war has always been between humans. It's not true. But we need to realize that habits get ingrained, and then it's really hard to get rid of them. So it's very important to pause. The crisis allows us to stop, to realize that we are here for more than killing each other or that hating each other. It's a wasted life, just spending your life hating the next person until you die. We are here for more than that. And that experience, I think in that sense, this approach of a post-humanist, post-anthropocentric and post-dualist can really help us in this navigating these different visions and ways of existing.
Thank you, Dr. Francesca, for linking that so wonderfully. Probably as a related question, I would ask you, your observations, somewhere you write and opine that post-humanism is a theoretical revision speciesism. Would you put your observations on that? I mean, if they're related also too.
Thank you so much, Sharmishta, for your question. Yes, so it is important to realize that as a notion, at least in the philosophical debate, there are different traditions that talk about speciesism very early on. For instance, in India, the Jain tradition, it's been very good about really having a non-anthropocentric approach. But in general, many traditions do approach the human from an anthropocentric perspective. As we were mentioning, the idea that the human is the best species, the most intelligent one, best reincarnation, best creature of God, all these notions that come from different traditions. Now, as a notion, speciesism comes from the 70s within the field of animal rights, and it is very important. And it is part of the discussion. What posthumanism does is kind of expanding of that notion of deconstructing the supremacy based on your species. So obviously, again, coming from the animal rights movement, very, very important. The 70s was about talking about the discrimination done on the name of species. So for instance, sexism is discrimination based on the gender or the sex or the sexual orientation of someone. Racism is discrimination based on the race or ethnicity of someone. Ethnocentrism, you have all these other type of discriminations. This term, speciesism, focus on the discrimination based on your species. So all of a sudden, for instance, you can kill a dog because you're a human, and no one is going to really, it's not going to be such a big deal. Maybe someone is going to, ask you why you did it, but you're not going to be in charge, you're not going to be in prison. It's not a big deal. Although this is changing. India has some interesting laws coming out that if you are harming dolphins, it's going to be really serious on a legal level as well. So there are laws changing. But in general, we have this supremacy based on the fact that we are human. So even if you are, if you have all these other type of discriminations, being a human, you're entitled on some level to discriminate on other species. Now, the post-human focuses on this notion of speciesism, of course, embrace this because we need to really deconstruct the human to this level, but also adds different layers. For instance, we're not talking anymore just about biological species, which is the root, the genealogy of the history of the term speciesism, 70s field of animal rights, which was the idea of some biological entities, specifically humans, discriminating against some biological species, other non-human animals. But now with posthumanism, the notion of life existence is not dualistic in the sense that it doesn't only focus on biological life. We're also thinking of robots, AI, technology. In this sense, when we're talking about speciesism, we're talking about not supporting any type of discrimination, not only based on biological species, but also other type of species. For instance, the idea of supporting the narrative of robots, which come from robota, Czech, which means slave. The idea that it's okay to think of robots as our next slaves. And this is something you find a lot written about it. It's almost like, oh, great, we cannot have human slaves, let's have robotic slaves. I think that's very problematic. First of all, because it keeps bringing to human consciousness this sense of entitlement, this sense of dualism, this sense of dichotomy, and this sense of supremacy that brings a lot of damage to individuals, to societies, to the species itself. Moreover, it's also very dangerous for the human, because now that AI is really taking over, if in a close future AI is going to take supremacy, now once you're talking about speciesism, it's not so much about humans discriminating against AI, but maybe AI discriminating against humans. AI thinking, well, humans are not that bright. Look at the history of the humans with all these tyrants and dictators and war and rape and killing and stealing and all. Maybe the humans are not that smart. Let's keep them as nice pets or something like that. So, of course, it's not about fear. This should never be about fear, what we do in our life. But I'm trying to say here that speciesism should be really considered in a serious way, in a comprehensive way, in a way that links very well to post-dualism, and in the sense that this sense of entitlement, this sense of exceptionalism should not be embraced, not only just against biological non-human others, so we are more intelligent than these other species, but also towards technology. I think technology is a way of revealing, is a way of manifestation of the divine, if you want to go through the divine realm. And if you do not want to go there, it's a manifestation, ontological manifestation. It's happening. It's here with us. It's changing the way we think of existence. It's existing with us, partaking in the existential quest. So trying to separate in us from what's happening by saying, oh, this is my new robotic slave, it's really not only wrong, but also damaging and also very, very risky. Very risky, not only for the individual understanding of existence, but for us as a species.
Thank you, Doctor. I mean, that was very nice, kind of, saying technology is an ontological manifestation, definitely a development on our old ideas. With that, we move on to the next question. It is often seen that movements and practices in the acknowledgement of alterity and acceptance of disenfranchised other generate newer types of hierarchies and different sorts of marginalization. A non-human entity, say, for example, a robot, which you were already saying, I get it, or an artificially intelligent being is often seen as the new other and subjected to newer forms of exploitation and abuse. How does posthumanism deal with such a problem? Could you elaborate on that?
Thank you so much, Sharmishta, for your question. Yes, you're right. On one level, this is something we really need to focus on, because on one level, there is all this excitement about the exotic other. So for instance, now specifically talking more about transhumanism doesn't really bring too much of human diversity to the conversation. The idea is that it's humans, it's kind of outdated, we can do better than that, but it's generalizing this neutral human that I really don't see as one, as we've mentioned before, because again, we are many and we come from many different traditions, and we need to acknowledge that in order not to repeat the same issues or moreover in the future. But it does approach robotic diversity, for instance, the exotic diversity, with a lot of excitement. So all of a sudden, the human is kind of outdated. Let's jump to the new technological other on one side. So it would be kind of the robot technology as the plus, transhumanism. Or you can see other type of narratives in which the technology become the fear, become the new risk. There is a lot of this kind of discussion. For instance, in the big movies, Hollywood is a great example to show, like a way to really instill a lot of fear in people. A lot of Hollywood movies are based on the idea of AI taking over, in which the technology gets out of the dominion of the human, the slave rebels, and all of a sudden the human has to fight back. Almost everyone dies, but then of course the human is going to make it. Now, both narratives for me are, I don't want to say wrong, because I do appreciate all perspectives, but are very partial. I think that we should not acknowledge, we should not talk about technology in this dualistic frame as something in separation from us, as something different from us, that all is going to be taking over us, or is going to be our goal, I want to be like that, or that is something that may get out of control. I think that a really nice way to think of technology is in this, as we were mentioning before, as an ontological manifestation. If we think, for instance, from a physics perspective, everything is energy. Everything is interacting, connecting. Everything is moving and vibrating. In that sense, technology is not different from us. Of course, there are always differences, as we said, from humans. But it's very important to keep in mind that the kind of narrative that we are constructing now about technology is going to be the prophecy of the future. Prophecies do not come out of nowhere. There is no one that just, invent something and boom, everyone is going to do the same. Prophecies often come out of narratives, social narratives that are repeated and taught to minds after minds, generation after generation, and so on. The prophecy of slavery was to teach for centuries that some humans were less than others. And young kids would learn that and portray and move on and keep these ideas alive. We need to realize that we have a huge responsibility, and also response/ability, as Donna Haraway says. We have the responsibility of the future because we are building the future. The future is not coming from nowhere. The future is not just, boom, all of a sudden there is the future. The future is already here in the way we think, in the way we exist, in the way we manifest. So in that sense, this construction of the narrative of technology is going to be key to the way technology is going to develop in the 21st and 22nd century and go on, because there is no going back. There is no going back. Time is not linear. Time is a spiral, or if you think of the yugas, is a circle, whatever you want to think of, but it's not just one thing after the other. You can jump from one or the other. It's merging and constantly interfering with each other. So in that sense, we have to understand that laws and societies and the way people are taught in families come out of philosophies, come out of ideas, come out of notions that are taught. Now, the way the narrative that is constructed around technology right now, for instance, by many Hollywood movies, is completely disruptive. It's very risky, and it's going to be the prophecy of the future. I'm not into that. I don't support that, because that's not what I'm seeing. I don't see a future in which all of a sudden, the human is keeping the robot as the slave, or the robot is enslaving the human. That's not a narrative that I ever supported in my life with any kind of existence. from humans to non-humans. And I'm not going to apply that to technology. So we need to be very aware that everything we do, the way we write, the way we speak, the way we behave is changing, is like in ocean, is changing existence. We are waves, and we do have an effect and an effect on everything else. So we are in this together, which means that we have full responsibility of what's happening, and we need to acknowledge that the way we are talking about technology is crucial to the development of technology itself. There is no slave who can be slave forever. Every slave eventually rebel. If we're thinking of technology in those terms, obviously we are prophesizing and creating an AI takeover. So I think it's very important to be humble in this and to be comprehensive and to be rooted in our technological roots, biological roots, ecological roots, to see the interconnection of existence with joy, with awareness, and with dignity.
Thank you, Doctor. With this idea of interconnectedness and merging, and also a kind of a flashback, I would ask you just to further elaborate as to somewhere you say again, that there's a link between feminism and posthumanism. So do you think both are counter discourses? I mean, how do you make this link? Over to Dr. Francesca.
Thank you so much, Sharmishta, for your question. Yes, you're right. So feminism and posthumanism are very connected. Actually, specifically critical posthumanism and cultural posthumanism come out of the movement of feminism of the 90s, which was postmodern feminism. But of course, you can root, the ideas of posthumanism in many other ways. But I just say that academically speaking, the deconstruction that started in the 70s, based on many different layers of the human. Of course, post-colonialism is another really important roots of posthumanism. A lot of Indian scholars have done a great work on this. But feminism, for instance, again, if we think of critical posthumanism with the work, for instance, of Catherine Hayles, which was a work that really popularized the notion of posthumanism within academia. So now the notion of posthumanism is being popularized outside of academia. So there is a lot of interest from journalists and medias and movies and et cetera, et cetera. But back, couple of decades ago, the notion of the posthuman was popularized specifically by this book. The title is How We Became Posthuman by Catherine Hayles. And she was bringing the notion of the posthuman from a deeply embodied feminist perspective. Now, why feminism is so relevant? Of course, it's not just because we are many. So, of course, gender is one of the layers that we really need to embrace, but also from specifically epistemological teaching that feminists give us, especially from the 90s, the teaching of the 90s of feminist epistemology, which was based on the idea of situated knowledges. The idea that every knowledge is situated, that every knowledge comes out of a specific experience, specific perspective. Of course, you can connect this to perspectivism. Nietzsche, again, the Jain tradition in India also talk about perspectivism long time ago, Mahavira, 6th century before the Common Era. So, of course, think always of a network of relations. The roots are not linear. We're not talking about the arborescent tree as Deleuze and Guattari focus on the notion of the rhizome. The rhizome, like ginger or turmeric, grows in a rhizomatic ways. So in that sense, also we can think of roots of things. So in that sense, feminism is really important on one side for the teaching that comes out of the feminist epistemology of situated knowledges. And another very important teaching that feminists give us is through the notion of ethics, feminist ethics, which are not based on abstract notions, but on the notion, for instance, of caring, or the idea of once you think of ethics as the ethos, again, ancient Greek, the habits of our existence, these habits are not based on abstract notions like what should I do in this situation, but how am I treating others? How am I living on this planet? How am I taking care of the place I inhabit, of the people I'm living with? So again, feminism brings a lot to the conversation, not only the idea of human difference, the importance of kind of the end of patriarchy as a historical time. We have all the Paleolithic up to the Neolithic, where we have a matrifocal society, modern society, I would say, symbolism. Most of the statues that are found at the time is portraying goddesses. And then you have a patriarchal time that starts with the beginning of writing until recently. And now we have a kind of a hybrid cosmology, a hybrid symbolism, the cyborg, the chimera, the hybrid, in which we don't need to be female or male to be in power. We don't need to be black or white to be in power. We don't need to be human or non-human to be in power. Power is everywhere. And this is again Nietzsche, Foucault, and many other traditions. Or if you want, God is everywhere. It doesn't matter too much kind of language you're using. So the point here is really understanding that because power is everywhere, because God is everywhere, we have to acknowledge fully the perspective and existential dignity of others and also our own. So it doesn't mean that I'm also only going to see the lights of others, because in order to see the light of others, I need first to see the light within myself. So to finish on your important question, feminism brings a lot to the conversation, not only on the history of posthumanism from the academic realm, but also from the symbolic realm, scientific, epistemology, and also, of course, perspectivism.
Thank you, ma'am, elaborating on that. Now over to Rohan, please. Rohan, could you take up from here?
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. I would like to ask you that in its in its depth and range of social awareness, posthumanism or philosophical posthumanism is something which seems to be very politically conscious, very politically charged. So, do you think that philosophies of our time has this prerogative to be politically conscious and socially performative, to make sense of the turbulent world order that we are living in?
Thank you so much for your question, Ron. Very important, especially with the crisis that we're facing. A crisis also brings the possibility of an epiphany, a possibility of a revealing. And in that sense, I absolutely see posthumanism as that type of philosophy. When this started to happen, a lot of people involved in the posthuman movement had to face themselves with this philosophy. Was this just some academic trend that we're writing about? Or is this something that helped us navigate this historical moment? So there were different answers. Of course, if the answer was it's just an academic trend, when you are in a situation where people around you are dying and you may die yourself, where the whole world is going through a pandemic, that would not really help you much. But if you understood posthumanism as a way of existing, then you realize it is not just an academic trend. If it was, and I went through this process myself, and I was ready to drop it. I was ready to see it just as something I was writing about, and I was ready to move on to what I needed to do. If I am going to have 1 month left in my life, and I'm not going to waste it writing on something that is not helping me. And when I started to really look deeper into posthumanism, I realized that it was helping me navigating this specific moment. I'm talking about, for instance, in my case, was a couple of months ago. I was based in New York. This was a moment where in New York was really a lot happening. And also I had family in Italy and friends in China and all these places, location of COVID, where you might lose someone forever. And you had to stop and you had to be in silence because there is not much more that you want to do. So in those moments where only I could find peace in silence, I had to be completely honest with myself. And that's when I realized that, yes, absolutely, not only posthumanism was not just an academic trend, but I was tired of getting caught into, let's say, the post of the post of the post. I realized that we were risking of losing the meaning of this message into terminology. I realized that we were to become much more public intellectuals. It's not enough to be in the ivory tower writing about great idea that not change no one's life. Because we're going to die, everyone is around going to die. What is going to be this for? And I realized that it was our duty to be present. I call it posthuman presence, to be present for the community. That's why we, I think it was Tajuddin that was mentioning the one nice side of this, apart from all the, crisis, tragedy, is the connection, global connection, that it really flourished. A lot of networks are being actually flourishing out of this moment of realizing that you need to connect with the community, you need to connect with others that speak your language. And I'm not talking about Italian or Hindu or Arabic or English. I'm talking about an existential language in which we understand each other, and not because we are from the same ethnicity, nationality, religion, or the food we eat. It's because we understand existence from a very similar perspective out of living on this planet for so long. And in that sense, I also want to mention this before the meeting is over. We're also going to be building a posthuman India network, because in India, the topic of posthuman is really flourishing. So we're going to come, of course, it would be lovely to have you all involved at Alia University and many other universities, because the network in India is booming. And not only the Latin American, with a posthuman Latin American network, African network, Turkish network, Italian network, this is really flourishing all over, as also a digital platform. Chinese, also the Chinese posthuman network. So the idea is that we understand that apart from politics that are not political anymore, I'm talking about, for instance, war between nations or economic interests. Those are not real politics, because these are not based on the well-being of the polis. And when we're talking about the polis as a species, we should think of planet Earth. Because if we're in this together, I cannot only think of my polis as in the little area that I live in the US or where you live in Calcutta. If we're thinking of a polis as a species, we need to think of a planet. In that sense, those kind of politics that are this country against that country or this nation against that, those for me are not based on real politics. They're based on economic interest or access to resources. That's a whole different kind of discourse. So I think that once we realize that we are in this together, that we, after years of living in this planet, realize that we are all connected, and that all these different religions, ethnicities, genders, races, cultures is actually enriching the human understanding of existence. Once we realize this, we can be on a platform together, talking together. And it's not anymore me Italian against my French brother or sister that, there is some mountains between us and so they are the enemies. We realize that we are talking a different language. We're not talking those dichotomical, oppressive, mainstream divisions that are taught to many humans since they're very young. So we free ourselves from all of that, and we realize that by freeing ourselves from those kind of division, we can be together talking about existence. So in that sense, you're absolutely right, Rohan. I think that if posthumanism does not do this, it should just get out of the picture. If posthumanism is not helping us to understand this, forget about this. For me, posthumanism, it helped me reaching this level of awareness, reaching this level of being able to connect to anyone from any part of the world, because again, we are in this together, we are a species. Doesn't mean we're all the same. Doesn't mean we should just universalize the human as the beautiful picture, but very anthropocentric of Leonardo, the Vitruvian man. That's not what we're talking about. We are not at the center of the universe, because the universe has no center. But we are in this together, and we are manifesting, and we are co-creating, and we are part of the ocean of existence. And that's beautiful. And that's the power of this moment, that it really helped in us realizing this.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your response. Before I move on to the next question, I would like to mention that Professor Ferrando has this brilliant book, Philosophical Posthumanism, which came out in 2009 from Bloomsbury. Everybody should check it out. Now, moving on to the next question. Posthumanism and transhumanism, these are related terms, and they kind of go on to share a dream about the betterment of the humans. But in their, say, philosophical underpinnings, in the way of kind of developing of the theory, they are radically different. Would you elucidate on that?
Thank you so much, Ron. Yes, you're right. There are many different movements, and now we're going to focus specifically on transhumanism and posthumanism. Although we should mention that there are more movements at the moment that are redefining, rethinking the human. I can mention anti-humanisms, meta-humanisms, new materialism, object-oriented ontology, and so on. So there are a lot of movements that are saying the human is not something to be for granted. It's not just a notion, it's not just a point of arrival, is a bridge, is a cycle, is a process, is moving, is changing. And what is really the human? So this is why I call this era the post-human era, not just because of philosophical posthumanism, because it's definitely only just one of the voices, but because I realized that this is the pressing question within the philosophical debate. What does it mean to be human in an age of great, not great in the sense of hierarchy, but of major biotechnological developments, of a major ecological disaster, of major global interaction? What does it mean to be human? Because it's not the same as 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, and that's fine, because the human is constantly changing as much as we are constantly changing. We are not the same as we were 1 year ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. We are constantly changing. The same goes for us as a species, as a society, and the planet itself is changing. So in that sense, many philosophies are asking this question. What does it mean to be human in the 21st century? So in that sense, I call it the post-human as really the philosophy or the philosophies of our time. So told, because it's happening, there are many different movements coming with very different answers. And this is true of any big shift in human consciousness. I bring an example just because, of course, comes with the notion of humanism. If you look back, for instance, at the Renaissance, Italian Renaissance, there are many Renaissance. There is the Bengali Renaissance, Harlem Renaissance. I'm talking, of course, you can bring also those as an example. But here I'm bringing the Italian Renaissance just because the notion of the humanism within Western philosophy was developed at the time. And at the time, there was not just one humanism. There were many philosophers really that were not agreeing with each other. So it's the same. When something is happening, it's not just one voice that it's clear. This clarity comes centuries later when people look at that period and say, oh, this is what these people were really talking about. The notion of humanism comes 200 years after the Renaissance. So the same goes for us. Probably 200 years from now, they're going to see us in a specific way, say, oh, those people, that's what they're talking about. But at the moment, the question is, okay, what does it mean to be human? Many different questions, many different answers. We're going to focus on two, specifically posthumanism and transhumanism, because they are the ones that are probably more known, more debated, but we should never forget there are many other movements going on and many more to come, because since it's happening, much more is flourishing. So transhumanism itself is saying something similar to posthumanism. They say, okay, the human is not something that should be taken for granted. It's not just a simple notion, closed notion, but it's a bridge, it's an opening, it's something that is evolving. How is this happening? To a specific goal. The specific goal of transhumanism is human enhancement, enhancing the human. Of course, you can ask, what kind of human are we talking about? That's another issue, because it's true that transhumanism does not deconstruct the human, does not locate themselves in the tradition of deconstruction, but more clearly in the Enlightenment. So they kind of go on with a narrative that was constructed. I'm not talking about Buddhist or Hindu or Sufi Enlightenment. I'm talking about the European Enlightenment of the 18th century, coming after the Industrial Revolution. That's where, philosophically speaking, transhumanists root themselves. In that sense, they bring about this notion of progress, the notion that we can move towards, let's say, better futures. How can we do it? By addressing some of the issues that humans have been constantly fighting against. One is death. It's true that if you look at many different traditions, ancient mythologies, Mesopotamian mythology, Gilgamesh, talk about the search for immortality. And this is really in all traditions, the idea, how can we get immortal? Different answers. Some religious traditions say, well, it's afterlife. Other traditions say that you are already immortal because we are constantly changing. So you, physically speaking, never die. You're only going to be transforming. But the transhumans give another answer. They're saying a way to become They used to say mortal, then they got a lot of criticism because obviously humans did not achieve that yet in the physical sense. So they changed the term into radical life extension. And so they say, how can you radically expand human life? And we're talking human life as it is and as it could be. We're talking about speculative technologies, emerging technologies. So we're talking about bodies that are not necessarily physical. Could be, for instance, the idea of mind uploading. So maybe my body is going to die, but my between little comma consciousness may be transferred into a machine, and that machine, by being transferred over and over again, can be living thousands of years. So again, we're talking about different possibilities. Other people are talking about gerontology and the idea that you could actually, through nanotechnology, reconstitute yourself over and over, Aubrey de Grey. So we could also think of physical bodies that reconstruct, regenerate themselves, rejuvenate themselves over and over through centuries. So again, he's also talking about thousands of years. He doesn't have a limit of how long your body could be doing this. Other ways, for instance, is cryonics. So maybe you are going to die, but this notion of death is not seen as the end, but as a, let's say, as a long sleep until technology find a way to solve the issue that got you dead. Let's say that you die of a cancer. And maybe it's a cancer that nowadays is not treatable, but maybe 200 years from now, obviously, it's going to be an easy one to treat. So you can be cryonized in these 200 years if your body is well preserved or is preserved well enough. Maybe technology of the future is going to bring you back to life. Other people are not so interested in bringing the whole body back. They cryonize only the head with the idea that their brain could be transferred. So transhuman is very interesting because they really have no nostalgia about the way we are or about the way we were. They are open to all the possibilities that the human could embrace with also hope and expectation. So that's really beautiful about transhumanism. The transhumanist movement really open all kinds of possibilities that are possible. Some of them are not here yet. Some of them are in, let's say, work in progress. But they really have this, if anything, they have some nostalgia of the future, but not of the past. I've been in some of, the Humanity Plus events, and I heard people saying, "Oh, I just wish I was, born 200 years from now." So they are basing themselves instead in a notion of linear time. But what I appreciate, and I do not consider myself a transhumanist, but what I do appreciate transhumanism is the power of envisioning possible futures. And they do that with great hope, with great expectation, and with faith. Most of them, although it's changing, but for instance, in the 90s, most of them were coming from an atheistic perspective. So the idea, you're lost God, but now you have faith in technology. Nowadays it's different. There are Mormon transhumanists, there are Muslim transhumanists, there are Hindu transhumanists. So now it's changing. A lot of people coming also from different backgrounds. But the idea is that if you want it from a religious perspective, God is in technology. And so you should embrace whatever comes, because whatever comes is a creation of God anyway, however you want to define God. So in that sense, nowadays, the transhumanist movement is definitely not just a movement that is an atheistic one. A lot of different approaches coming also from religious background. But the idea is that embracing the future in all of its possibilities to, for instance, get rid of human disease, to get rid of congenital diseases and for instance, death. How can we get into radical life extension, expanded life, having, for instance, now with COVID, can we do something about, for instance, not having pandemics anymore from a genetic perspective? Some people embrace biotechnology and altering human DNA. And that's a huge debate. A lot of people are against it worldwide. Let's say that at the moment there is no nation that positively supports it. Some nations are neutral. They're not against it, but they're not positively encourage the alteration of human DNA. But it's a possibility. It's happening. We're the first, let's say, between designer babies, officially been born 2 years ago, and non-officially maybe earlier than that. So it's happening that you maybe in favor or against, we should be talking about this, because this is not science fiction in any way. If anything, is the past already. So in that sense, transhumanism is very good to bring in technology in the conversation, not only as emerging possibilities of what we could do with this, but also what we can do right now with the technology we have. And most of them are bioliberals in the sense that they support, for instance, genetic engineering, genetic enhancements, and all these kind of discourses. So that's transhumanism. And posthumanism, on the other side, it's much more diversified on the notion of human enhancement. Some posthumanists are maybe closer to in favor than not. Some others are very much against it. So there is not a specific answer, yes or not, about human enhancement, but it's more about how are you going to do it? Why are you going to do it? It's all the intentions, consequences. It's, let's say, I would say, with the risk of generalization, that transhumanism is very proactive about bioengineering, human enhancement, while posthumanism is, I would say, a little more precautionary. So let's be cautious about this. It's a possibility out there. It's happening. We don't know much about it. We don't know much about altering human DNA. We don't know much about the consequences. So let's go slow with this. Let's keep an eye on this. And but again, it is a generalization, because some posthumanists are very much against, and some of them are lightly in favor. So I would say, but it's not the main goal of posthumanism, human enhancement. It is the goal of transhumanism. And the goal of posthumanism is really readdressing existence to all these layers, more of an existential awareness. Transhumanism, the goal is re-engineering the human to get rid of issues that the human had struggled with for since the human been manifesting, and death, disease, etc., etc.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that wonderful explanation. I would like to ask a related question, that with our, say, our insatiable consumerist greed and our basically anthropomorphic kind of, say nature, we as humans have become sorts of agents who are going on changing the climate of the planet. We have entered the era of the Anthropocene. So how does posthuman as a philosophy go on to critique this notion of the Anthropocene?
Thank you so much, Ron, for your question. Very important question at the very core of posthumanism. As I mentioned, transhumanism really focuses on human enhancement, again, going beyond the historical limits of the human, thinking of ways humans have never been, and that's fine, and that's also beautiful and visionary with its own limits. Posthumanism, on the other side, it's really focusing not only on how the human could be, but how the human is. Because as we were mentioning before, the future is not coming from nowhere. The future, we are the prophecy of the future. We are creating the future. So in the sense, if I really want to engage with the future, I can not only envision humans with wings, which is beautiful. I would love to fly. That's the only thing that I would really like that I don't have as a human being. I would like to have wings to fly to India and see you all, and then come back home and and then go to the Sahara Desert. But I cannot do it. I don't have flights of my own. But the human, from the posthuman perspective, is located, is embodied. That's also a teaching of feminism. Obviously, it's located in a geological time, and this time is specifically readdressed by geologists. 2 years from now, we're going to see if it's also accepted formally. At the moment, it's considered as an informal term, but widely accepted, which is the Anthropocene. What does it mean? It means that we used to learn in school that we are living in the era of the Holocene, where humans are just one of the big picture. We don't really have much of agency. We don't have, our actions don't really have consequences, because we are too much of a fragment of a big picture, Holocene. But now the Anthropocene, the whole narrative is changing. Anthropocene is focusing on the anthropos, because we are realizing that we are not only having huge impacts on planet Earth, but to the point that we are seen and recognized as a geological force, like an earthquake, like a volcano. We are seen as a geological force, as a force of the chaos of the earth. In that sense, we have huge impacts. We are not just a micro drop in the big ocean that doesn't make any change. We are huge waves in the ocean that is changing the whole biosphere on many levels. So this is taken very seriously by the posthuman and also very interactively, in the sense that we can no longer think of the humanities, philosophies, laws, science, and any other, or ourselves, in separation from the planet. And again, when I say the planet, I see everything included in the planet, us, other species, like plants and technology. I'm not saying just, like us as, like us in the plural, in the plural. So in that sense, the Anthropocene become really a perspective, like a location that cannot be forgotten, cannot be erased, and cannot be, it has to be acknowledged. So that's why it's also different from the transhuman. The transhumanists don't, they are too lost for me in the future to realize where we are at in the present, and to realize that the future, again, it's rooted also. The future is rooted not in the Borosian way. It's not like a linear tree, but it's rooted in the rhizomatic way, like ginger or the turmeric. In that sense, we need to acknowledge all these relation to see what kind of future are we building, what kind of future are we manifesting more than building, better term. So in that sense, the Anthropocene is at the core, cannot be separated from a posthumanist understanding of existence. And it does not come with drama. It does not come, as for instance, the human movement, with the idea that we are so bad, we should just get extinct. It doesn't have this flavor of tragedy, of self-compassion, self-pity, and self-hate. Nothing of that. It comes with full acknowledgement and full realization that, first of all, it doesn't have to be that way. Second of all, it's happening. And third of all, we need to have this in mind in everything we do. So the point is not that, again, as a species, we are so bad that solution is our extinction. And some movements are talking about it, for instance, anti-humanism, some type of anti-humanism. But the posthumanism is different. It's the idea that the human is not one, it's many. Some humans are actually enlightened. We have a lot of examples in the history of mystics and people who completely understood the human is these open interrelated waves. And I'm sure that everyone here can mention some examples. And they are not only famous examples. They may people who were completely unknown and that were fully enlightened. So I'm not talking about only the big names, because also the big names come in the hierarchical history of construction of history, and only some people are recorded, other people are not, because of their skin color, because of gender, or anything else. But I'm talking there are many humans who actually got it. So I'm not saying that the human per se is a bad species that should just get extinct, as some people are saying, not posthumanists, but the anti-human movement, a human movement. I'm not from those perspectives, though I acknowledge what they're saying. I see that, there is something there. We are not doing such a great job. But again, we are many and we can change, and we are changing because there is nothing stable. Again, thinking through physics, everything is vibrating, everything is energy. The only reason why things are going on the way they are is because of habits. These habits can be changed right now by us. And in order to change these habits, we need to realize where are we coming from and what we're being taught and who we are. So again, going back to the beginning of our conversation, realize who you are is the best gift you can give to yourself and to human species, to the planet, and to many other entities and God, if you believe in that or not. But the point here is that the Anthropocene is part of who we are. We are part of a planet. We are part of a species. We cannot forget that. Of course, again, the species is not one, but many. So we cannot just generalize all the humans as these, terrible species. I don't like those kind of narratives either. But we cannot think of nothing, not even ourselves, in separation from this embodied location, geo-historical location. And again, this should not come with drama, or we should come in a very rooted, in a very acknowledged position, that instead of changing because of self-compassion or self-pity, or you are making the change that you want to see because you are dead. Because if the planet is in crisis, you are in crisis. Because if we are creating the ecological damage, we're going to die of cancer. The rate of cancer within 30 years of my life has gone exponentially. When I was a kid, someone was diagnosed as a cancer, it was a big drama. Nowadays, everyone has some type of cancer because of the ecological crisis. So things are changing. We need to acknowledge that the ecological crisis is going to reflect into the human crisis, as the pandemic is showing, because this pandemic is coming out of us, out of our actions. So the point here is to understand that we are part of everything and that what we do does matter.
Ma'am, over to you. We can take questions too, ma'am, if you like.
Yes, might be. I mean, how does Professor, I mean, what do we do? Do we take questions in between from the audience, or should we carry on to the end? And what do you suggest?
So like checking the time, so 11:06, and people have already been very, very kind to be together for more than 1 hour and a half. I would say maybe 10 minutes of questions, and then we end by 11:20. What do you think? Something like that at the end, no later than 11:30. I'm talking, of course, about my time. I'm talking about S time, but for you would be another 10 to 20 minutes, just to make sure that people also have time for a break, time for some silence if they need to drink or to do whatever.
Questions, ma'am. We have multiple questions in the chat box.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we are. There are lots of questions in the chat box, ma'am.
Would you like to take over? Ma'am?
Hello, ma'am. Professor, are you here?
Yeah. Yes, I'm here. If you want, you can read a couple of questions and we can address them. And then also we should mention that there are going to be more events, and also it would be wonderful to be together again, maybe around December too. And thinking also about other events happening in India in December. We connected, and we can connect maybe the Indian Posthuman network, in which maybe instead of having such a long, beautiful event with, maybe one or two speakers, maybe we can have everyone having a couple of minutes to present themselves and their views, and we can have 2 hours of just giving people space in order to connect and hearing voices. But I'm very, happy to listen to some of the questions and answer some of them, although again, it's we just don't want to keep people too long, because then it becomes a marathon of philosophy, and then we gave maybe.
Ma'am, we can always come back, ma'am. I mean, but there are too many questions in the chat box, ma'am. Maybe we'll take them up, a few, and then again come back with that conversation, ma'am. I think could we do that, ma'am? Then we take up the questions.
Yeah, we can take up the questions. Yeah.
Ma'am, if we go by the first question, ma'am, this is from Shanti Ranjan Singh, ma'am. How do you see the impending disaster? I mean, a very, very straight question. How do you see the impending disaster? That's the question which he has posed, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Shanti, for your question. I see it, of course, as a moment of crisis. But as we mentioned, a crisis is not necessarily something bad or good. It is a moment in which there is a stop. There is a pause for many different reasons. In this case, for instance, is the pandemic. And it is a moment that is brutally sincere and honest for us to see where we are at. So in that sense, it is also a moment of brutal honesty from a social perspective. A lot of the injustice that was already happening before is going to be even more clear with, for instance, the pandemic. A lot of racial injustice and ethnic injustice and class injustice. All these are emerging even more clearly. It's not that before were not happening. Now it's even more clear, for instance, that some part of the population are being affected much more by COVID-19 because of their ethnicity, because of their class, because of their conditions in which they live. So the crisis itself is, again, being brutally honest, showing where we are at in a society. Also, on a personal level, there is a lot of psychological issues that are also coming out of this. Obviously, the issues are not just coming out of COVID-19, probably were issues that were already boiling inside of the person, who all of a sudden, if you have the chance to social distancing, because a lot of people do not have that the chance, and they live in situations where they cannot have social distance, but if you do have that opportunity to have social distance, you're going to be on your own. You're going to be surrounded by yourself. You're going to be the mirror of yourself. And you're going to see things that you may have not wanted to see in the past. So it is a moment of brutal honesty on some level. And it's shaking and it's hard to digest, but we don't need to digest it. We can chew through it and understand what we need to see. And in this sense, as a society, we are seeing big issues we need to face. We need to do something about it, because these issues are not just the results of COVID-19. These issues were there before, but we were too busy in our own little mind games or in our little life games to be able to acknowledge all these problems. And the other one is us and where we are in our life. And what about death? And what about dying? And what about seeing death as also the moment that allows you to be alive? Because if you are eternal, if you are living forever, you may do nothing with your life because you're always postponing and procrastinate what you need to do with your life. Because you know you can do this 300 years from now or 1,000 years from now, does not matter. But if you know that your life is going to come to an end, you're going to do something with this. And if you are not going to do something with this, COVID-19 and the situation is shaking you to realize that, yes, you're going to die as well. And the people around us are dying. So in that sense, it's very Heideggerian. Death become what gives life a meaning on some level. And or in some sense, there is no life without death in order to give meaning to our own existence. To me, it was the case in the sense that I think I always being quite honest with what I need to do in my life. But again, COVID-19 helped me to stop again deeply and really, really, really realize what I was doing. And in my case, I find, for instance, that I was hypocritical on some way I was existing. The way I was existing, for instance, it was in a city with, creating a lot of garbage when it's hard to recycle. I realized that I could not do that anymore. I realized that I need, for instance, in my case, a deeper connection with the land. I'm thinking about and trying to move in a place where I have direct access to the land, where I can hear non-human voices, when I can hear and see different kind of animals, and when I can have a different kind of life. So for me, that could have come maybe later on in my life, but it was so obvious. I was like, if I die tomorrow, the way I'm living, it's not fully what I want to see. I'm not being fully honest with myself. I'm not being fully honest with what I know it should be done and what I'm doing. And that pushed me to really move on the direction. Well, without COVID-19, I would have been too busy, moving around here and there and giving lecture without really seeing what am I doing with my life, with my own footprint on this planet. So what I said that in my case, it has been not bringing so much, on one side, the first months where all this was happening, again, based in New York, having people in family in India, in China, and in Italy, it was really about being able to be silent and find my own inner peace. And I found it through meditation. That was the only peace that I could find because I was too concerned about what was happening. And after that, after finding that peace of mind, done also two beautiful readings from many different traditions, mystic traditions. I read a lot in March and April. I was reading a lot of mystics from all kinds of traditions, Hindu and Islam and Christian, all traditions. That gave me a lot of peace. And after that, I was able to realize that I had to be there for others. And in my case was also being present digitally, having events, connecting with others, because I realized that it was not anymore just an option, it was an urgency, the urgency to be present, the urgency to be present for the human species in a moment of crisis. Also together, we can create different paths, and together we can deconstruct long habits that have been part of our species for too long. We can only do this as a species. So it's very important to connect all these layers, the individual, the social, the species, the planetary, and then you move on, to the universe and multiverse. All these connected, and should not be scaring. It's not too much. It's not too little. It's what it is. And that's beautiful, and that's where you are. You are at an intersection of so many different energies and relations and insights and movements and dynamics. And by the way you exist, all these intersections are shifting. So really realizing the power of your presence in the way you exist, from your thoughts, from the way you write, the way you treat others, the way you dream, everything included.
Thank you, Dr. Francesca. You see, there are about 10, 12 more questions. Shall we take all of them? I mean, say one after the other?
Yes.
Is it possible? Or, I mean,
take a couple, I guess, ma'am.
in a couple, yeah, I think, yeah, it's, then we take the next question. Say this is from Padmanabha Trivedi. How is posthumanism different from the deep ecology? Because the latter also seeks to remove anthropocentrism by advocating intrinsic value of all species, which is independent of human use. He has asked for an enlightenment regarding this.
Thank you so much, Padmana, for this question. Very important. So yes, they are very, very related. On some level, I see deep ecology as one of the genealogical sources of posthumanism. And again, let's not think so much in the arborescent way. Again, let's think more into the rhizomatic way, as deep ecology is one of the many rhizomatic roots of posthumanism. One thing, though, that is a bit different is that while deep ecology is really focusing on, anthropocentrism, going beyond anthropocentrism, bringing the non-human back to the conversation, this non-human is still, let's say, biological. Nothing wrong with that. But posthumanism is not biocentric. In that sense, it's not technocentric, because I see transhumanism as a bit technocentric. Now, posthumanism is not biocentric. Let me clarify this, because maybe it just sounds like a philosophical term. It means that it doesn't place bios, which in ancient Greek means life. To be precise, is actually human life, because zoe in ancient Greek is non-human life. So it's based in a dualism, but it's taken more in general to refer about life. Biology is the study of life, for instance. So in that sense, some people are saying, okay, enough of humanism, let's go biocentric. Posthumanism, at least the way I would say philosophical posthumanism is definitely not biocentric, in the sense that the solution is not jumping from a center to another center, but to realize the centers are everywhere, depending on the perspective. Right now, for instance, I'm seeing you from my perspective. I'm looking around and I see all kinds of things. From where you are seeing us from your perspective. You are looking around and you're seeing all kinds of things as well. It's not that one perspective is more central than the other. It depends where you're located. And there is no one center of the earth. The center is everywhere, depends on where you're located. Delphos was considered the center of the world for the Greeks, but because the Greeks were based in Greece. If you were in India, Delphi was not the center. So the idea is that there is no center, depends on your location. So in that sense, posthumanism is not biocentric, because you recognize that the existential unfolding is happening on many different levels, and is also, for instance, happening at the technological level. Now, of course, you could claim, but it's not done much, that technology is still biological in the sense that everything of technology anywhere first comes from the planet. Think of the computer you're using. It comes, the working of the computer comes through specific minerals. For instance, a lot of Apple products, if you're using Apple, are using minerals coming from Congo. So I say that eventually you can all trace back to the earth. But in general, biocentrism is the idea of deconstructing the human to see life as, for instance, non-human life, plants, ecology, etc., etc. In that sense, it's still a centrism. I would say that deep ecology is definitely one of the roots, but the difference is that posthumanism acknowledges existential awareness in, I would say, a wider perspective of not really deconstructing the human to go to biological life, but seeing existence again also in technology. You might want, some people use the term of AI as artificial life or artificial intelligence. You don't have to use the notion of life, but I definitely see existential awareness being manifesting also through technology. So in that sense, I would say that deep ecology is very important, but I wouldn't recommend to shift to ecology in order to, for instance, move away from technology. I would say that technology is happening, and of course we have some issues, technological addictions for individuals, but also as a society. So there are many issues of technological control, privacy breaks, and there are a lot of issues with technology. So I'm not saying that technology is just the next big thing or anything like that, but we need to acknowledge technology. We need to acknowledge technology, not just some tool that we are using. Technology is not just a tool we are using. Technology is changing the way we are perceiving existence. So technology has, for me, to be reconsidered in relation to what it means to be human, because it's, again, clearly unfolding in the 21st century. And on some level, humans have been defined as such because of technology. Through paleontology, define the human as that animal that creates tools out of tools. Or Bernard Stiegler, also a very famous, important philosopher who just died, and I want to recognize his memory. He was a wonderful philosopher, but he sees technology at the core of philosophy and at the core of humanity. So just saying this, that deep ecology absolutely important, but I would not say that it's the same, because posthumanism also open the reflection and existential awareness as well to technology as well.
Thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful answer. There are absolutely many questions, but because of this, it's already 9 over here, ma'am. So we'll take one more question for you. So this is from Kasturi M. What is your opinion on legal rights being granted to natural phenomena like rivers, lakes, for example, Lake Erie in Ohio or the Ganges in India? Do you think such a move is potentially powerful, or does the plaintiff power of personhood become a liability risk in this sense? That's the question, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Kasturian, for this question. Very important. I must say that I am personally very excited to see this shift in the legal realm. That started some years ago. India, again, was a great example some years ago, recognizing the rights of dolphins as non-human persons. And then many other countries like Colombia recognizing the Amazon as an entity with rights. Of course, the criticism that has been done is that the whole realm of rights come out of a specific tradition, humanistic tradition, in which the notion of the human has been universalized, but we're really talking about a specific type of human, which was white, which was male, which was Western, which was physically able, which was with possessions, etc., etc. So on one side, some people say, well, the answer here is not the expansion of rights, but to change the whole discourse, the whole narrative radically. I think that one doesn't go against the other. I think that there are many levels of work to be done. And I think that, of course, it doesn't mean that, recognizing rights is the solution. I think, though, it's part of the change that is happening. We should acknowledge it with great joy to see that traditions that come out of very humanistic roots are realizing the limits of those roots and are trying to do something about it. So I am personally very happy when I see those kind of changes. Of course, I don't think that that's the solution. I see that as part of possible ways to go about it that are very welcome. Other people are thinking, for instance, of diets. Let's go vegan or vegetarian. These are all nice solutions. These are all part of the conversation that is happening. We are not going to find the solution. There is not the final solution. There are all ways to change. There are all ways to bring other ways of existing, other ways of interacting. And I think the legal answer to recognize rights to, for instance, natural phenomena and non-human animals, etc., it's very important because we are living in a legalistic system. We are living in a society that is asking you, mostly not directly, unless you are asking for a citizenship, but indirectly to be part of the social contract. The social contract is based currently on laws. And by being born and raised in specific societies, you usually silently acknowledge that you are accepting the specific social contract. Now, for instance, if you are applying to become citizen of a different country, they might ask you directly, are you okay with our set of laws? Because once you become our citizen, you need to accept those. And you usually have to say yes, or you can say yes with some exceptions, and you have to explain the reasons why you may have those exceptions, and your citizenship may be granted or not. But in general, we are living in a legalistic system in which most societies are based on laws that we are supposed to accept. Once we live in that kind of society, changes in laws are crucial. That's why, some people who are, some of my students actually, are interested in laws, and I always say, you are at the forefront of the legalistic discussion. You are good to go because you are going to be part of a very interesting next 20 years in which a lot of laws are going to be changing. So you are in a very good place to be for a PhD, for a job, or for anything like that, coming from a post-human perspective. So I think that law is very important. Of course, it is not the final solution because I don't see any final solution. I see many ways, many things changing, bringing different perspective. And when I say change, I'm not saying from something stable to something stable. I'm saying in the constant flux of existence that is constantly changing. Because we are constantly changing. Everything is constantly changing. And that's existence itself. So in that sense, I do see the change in the legal system as very welcome. Yes, it's not the final solution, but there is no final solution. So I see that as part of the movement, as part of the changes, and I personally think that it's very, very important, and we should all recognize that. And it also makes sense. It is also maybe not just abstract philosophy, but it's a good example to bring to people. And I bring this example often when I see practical examples of changes that are happening from a humanistic perspective to post-anthropocentric laws are very good examples. So I think that it is definitely to be encouraged.
Thank you, ma'am, for answering that. There are, again, as I told, a lot of questions, but we cannot simply take them all. This is to audience. Dear audience, you've been very patient. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for all your questions. They have been very enlightening. And to Professor Francesca, this has been a very, very scintillating talk, illuminating a conversation, the revolution in epistemology that is basically taking place in leaps and bounds. Yes, you have basically opened the doors for us, new research and new thoughts. And thank you for your immense patience. Thank you for elaborating so well and talking to us, being with us. We are immensely honored, really honored. I mean, and I think the audience has been enriched as well. Thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to future associations with you. Similarly, as you have said, yes, there will be ties between the universities and the Asian Indian chapter. We look forward to that. We look forward also to be associated with you. Over to Rohan, sir, if you want to say something.
Thank you, ma'am, so much for just being there for us and encouraging. And we look forward to again connect with you in future. Thank you. We are deeply honored. Thank you, ma'am.
Well, thank you so much, Rohan, for inviting me to be part of this. Thank you so much, Sharmisha, for your beautiful question. Thank you so much, Tajuddin, for organizing this and for the invitation. And thank you so much also, Ahmed, for the beautiful introduction that you gave. Thank you so much, Alia University, for allowing this. All the people who've been very patient with us for 2 hours talking about posthumanism, you are it. You are the way. We are part of this together, and we are manifesting existence. So thank you so much for taking these 2 hours to really think together, because we can manifest the way we see existence, and we are already doing it. So thank you so much for all your work, all your insights, all your visions, and we are going to definitely move on with talking about this. Is not the end of the discussion. This is the beginning, and we are going to help forming this Indian Posthuman network, which is very vibrant. And so we definitely need more to be all together again very soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So we end the session now?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, right. Thank you also thank you for being with us.
Thank you, everybody who was present over here. Thank you, Riaz bhai.
We end the session. Ron, leaving then. Ron?
Okay, sure, ma'am. Sure.
Mm-hmm.